All right, welcome back. I just kind of want to talk about some teams kind of maybe overperforming, underperforming. Am I worried? Am I not worried? There are some teams that you can make a case for that should be on this list, but in all honesty, I haven't necessarily watched enough of certain teams to really make a strong assessment as to what's going on and kind of give a further analysis. One of the most notable being the Edmonton Oilers. I have not watched a single Oilers game to this point. I have watched all of these teams so far play. There are others I've watched play where I feel like they're fine. Like Dallas, for example, I've seen Dallas. Actually, no, I've seen two Dallas games. That team is an absolute wagon, top to bottom. Great offense, solid defense, solid goaltending. From both Ottinger and DeSmith and net, both look good. Right, so there are some teams that are just not on the list because whatever. But the ones I do want to talk about are here. There's one from each division, at least one. Um, let's start with the Atlantic. Let's start off with the Florida Panthers. Florida Panthers have such a strong and deep team. They can play any type of hockey. They're currently 5-3-1, 11 points, but they're on top of the Atlantic Division, and I have no worries about them. I know there's been concerns about their goaltending and Bobrovsky. Bobrovsky can be hot and he can be cold. It's just one of those things. And the way Florida plays, they're aggressive on the forecheck. They're aggressive trying to get breakaways, playing with speed, and as a result, you're going to give up odd man chances against. This has been Florida's mentality for really since Paul Maurice took over. And it honestly, like, it has its pros, it has its cons, but Florida is very good at limiting those odd man rushes and taking the pressure off the goaltender. But nonetheless, it forces your goalie to make big saves. And if your goaltender isn't hot, he's not the hot hand, then you're going to let in goals. I think they'll be fine. I don't really have any concerns with Florida. But I know there's been a lot of like uneasiness about the goaltending situation in Florida currently. I'm not super worried about it. They're a very good team. They'll probably still be the best team in the Atlantic Division at the end of the season. It's still early. Again, take a lot of this with a grain of salt. Some of these teams have played what 5 games, 5 6 games. Some of them have played 10. So we'll dive into it a little more. Boston, there is some concern. Now, I'm a Bruins fan. There's just, I like to be transparent. I know there are new people that watch various videos, and, this might be your first time watching. I am a Bruins fan. I am from the Boston area. The Bruins are 3-4-1. They currently have 7 points. Their goaltending, I think, is fine. Corpusalo kind of looks as advertised. I projected him to have a very good bounce back year. Not going to be like a starter or an elite goaltender, but a guy that could push for around a 9-10 save percentage. I don't think we're going to get that this year. He hasn't been bad. He's made some good saves. He looks positionally sound for the most part. You can see him adjusting his game in net from where he was really in Ottawa, and a little bit in his later years in Columbus. Kind of likes to leave the crease quite a bit. So I think that'll help him. I think he'll get better as the year goes on. But my issue with Boston isn't their goaltending. It's not their defense. It's really their ability to generate offense. Um, you had a lot of guys last year who had career years. Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha. There's a bunch. Trent Frederick, for example. Frederick's been pretty good. They're relying on some of these younger guys to come in and take bigger roles. Morgan Geekie was another guy who had a career year. You really haven't gotten any production from your second line, which is a concern. Marchand, not really surprised, kind of continuing what he was the end of last season in an aging winger, right? You have Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy trying to do too much, and they're taking not necessarily savory shots, and turning the puck over at unnecessary times. There's kind of an issue with Boston's offense, and there's a big disconnect. I do have concerns. I had them last year, but then a bunch of guys had career years, and Boston was a solid team last year. We'll see how this year pans out. It's still early. They're only 4 points away from first place in the division, but I definitely do have concerns about the Bruins. and specifically their ability to score goals. Next up, the Metro Division, New Jersey Devils. The Devils are a strong offensive team. That's nobody should be surprised by that, especially when they have Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier centering those top two lines. Hischier, very good 200-foot player. This is a team that has struggled defensively and kind of with goaltending somewhat. I think Markstrom's been fine, but I think he's been kind of left hung out to dry on more than one occasion. Right? You'll get Brett Pesce back in the lineup, I believe, tonight. Do they play tonight? I think tonight. And Luke Hughes as well. Luke Hughes, still a defensive liability, but Brett Pesce, more of a defensive defenseman. So even if those two are paired together, it shouldn't be all that bad. Right? You might get a little more offense out of that line, but at the same time, this is a team that needs to figure out how to play defense. Now, Sheldon Keefe, we know this. He's a guy that likes to push offense. He's very offensively oriented and focused, and that often leaves the defense forgotten about. So I'm curious to see how this season progresses for New Jersey, but honestly, there's a little bit of concern. A lot of people, I think including myself, picked them to finish in the top three in the Metro Division. They've played 10 games so far, and they have 5 wins and 5 losses, 4 in regulation. They at this point they could be vouching for a wild card team. I'm not entirely sure, but I definitely do have concerns about their ability to defend and their ability to defend throughout the remainder of the season. Part of that's on the team, and part of that's on the coach, Sheldon Keefe. Right? Because this isn't new. This isn't something new with Sheldon Keefe specifically. Great coach, can really get your offense rolling like no other, but at the same time leaves your back end quite exposed. Next up, Washington Capitals. I've been pleasantly surprised with the Capitals. They've been playing very well. They're scoring goals. They're playing defense. I've only watched one Capitals game, but Tom Wilson has been absolutely lighting it up and going off and earning his contract. Kind of a power forward that's putting the puck in the net. It's fun to watch. So shout out to Tom Wilson, who has really... You haven't heard too much from Tom Wilson the past few years in terms of the negativity, which is nice. At least his questionable hits and so on. So that's good to see, because when Tom Wilson's playing his game as an effective power forward who's not in the penalty box, he's a solid top 6 forward in the NHL, and there's no doubt about that. I still struggle with the fact that this team, I guess that's not a good way to put it, but I can foresee this team struggling to score goals throughout the remainder of the year. You have some guys that are absolutely hot right now. You have Connor McMichael, who's looked pretty solid, at least in the offensive zone. Guy who's learning how to play defense and is playing a lot more defense than we saw last year, right? But I don't know how sustainable a 5-1 record is at this point in the season. I'd love to see Washington do well. I'd love to see them in the playoffs. They're not a team I root for, but they're not a team I don't like, right? Very, very indifferent. One of my favorite players in the league is John Carlson, defenseman on the Capitals. I think, he had a few years where he was like a Norris contender and so on, but I think he's one of the better 200-foot defensemen in the game. That dude is fantastic. So Washington, I could see him taking a bit of a step back, but I'm rooting for him. Next up, we're moving on to the Central, where we got some teams. The Winnipeg Jets, 7-0-0. Man, this team is scoring. This team is defending. This team is getting goaltending. They look great. They've won all 7 games they've played. 4 of them in regulation, 3 of them in overtime. And doesn't matter how you get the points. You're getting the points, and unless it comes down to a tiebreaker. But we don't see that too often. And Winnipeg is looking good. I think they're playing a little above what the team is. I think their offense, again, came out starting hot. They look good. I think their defense, despite some of the holes that they didn't fill from losses last year, like Brendan Dillon, for example, they look okay. I do have some concerns about the defense, but you're getting defense from your forwards as well. It's finding and maintaining that balance of defense versus offense from your forward group throughout a 60-minute game, throughout the entire season. Winnipeg, at this point, I can see them easily being in the top three in the Central Division, but it's still early. I think they're going to lose games at some point. They're not going to go 82-0. If they do, I will eat my words 1,000% because that would be an incredible thing to see. But I don't see this being sustainable at a rate it is. I can see him taking a bit of a step back. I still pick Dallas to win the division at this point. I think they're 6-2, but nonetheless, Winnipeg absolutely rolling right now and getting off to a hot start. According to the statistics, are important. Next up, Minnesota 5-0-2, 12 points. Minnesota looks good. Now, this is a team that struggled with goaltending last year with Gustafsson and Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, Gustafsson last year came into camp out of shape and kind of fluctuated throughout the season. He had a month or so where he was good and a few months where he really regressed and then finished the season strong. Fleury is Fleury. He's, 40 years old, just doing his thing. But Gustafsson came into camp with something to prove this year, and he's been probably one of the best goalies in the league. Now, how sustainable that is for an 82-game schedule, I don't know. But we're seeing a Minnesota team that is playing more defense than we saw them play last year, more team defense. They're being responsible. Their lines are matching up. How do I put this? The Wild, whoever's on the ice for the Wild, are playing well against whoever they're matched up against, right? If you're going up against the Kucherov line, this is just an example. This isn't like reality. But if you're going up against like the Kucherov, Braden Point line, you're going to have to be defensively responsible. You're going to, you don't want to forecheck too hard because that can lead to odd man rushes behind you. Maybe like a 3-on-2, a 4-on-3 or something. And that's a line that can really bounce the puck around and get a nice shot out of that because you were the one guy that was forechecking too hard and caught slightly out of position. They will take advantage of that. So this is a team that really knows their opponent and has played well. You have Matt Boldy, who has looked confident every single game. He looks good. You have Marco Rossi, who's scored a point in every single game they've played this year. A young guy taking that next step. You have Matt Zuccarello shooting the puck and scoring. He's got a nice shot when he shoots. He just has to shoot. You have Kirill. He has 3 goals so far, but he has, 9 assists or something crazy. He is a guy that he doesn't have to shoot all the time now because he's got competent line mates for the most part and that depth in other lines. Right? Kaprizov's playing extremely well. Faber, I thought his bouncing back really nicely. I think he had kind of not a bad first few games, but defensively, it looked like he took a bit of a step back from last year, but he's back in it and he looks just as good defensively as he did last year. And you got guys. You got Middleton stepping up. He had a 3-assist game the other night. And you're getting the goaltending. When your defense lapses, you're getting the goaltending. So, I don't know how sustainable this is, but if this team keeps playing as they are, and it's very business, very professional, this is one of those teams that could surprise some people this year if they stay healthy. Remember, Jared Spurgeon is already out. Ryan Hartman has been out of the lineup. Eriksson Ek missed 2 games with a broken nose. Right? These are important pieces that provide depth, substantial depth, or just a solid blue line. And we saw some lapses on the blue line against Tampa with John Merrill. When you rely on John Merrill too much, there tend to be some defensive lapses in, right? And we saw that. So the depth is going to be tested throughout the year. We'll see how they bounce back. I don't think they're going to finish at the rate they are, but nonetheless, if I could see this being somewhat sustainable. I think they're going to give up more goals, and it's how you respond, and they've responded well to giving up goals the past few games. So we'll see. This Winnipeg, Minnesota, I think they're both teams that could surprise some people this year. Utah, I think, is about right, but they got off to such a hot start, and they've really cooled down. So I figured it warrants some discussion. keep in mind Utah has John Marino out, who is a fairly solid defensive defenseman, and Sean Dursey out, who is more or less an offensive defenseman. Right. They also have Bukestad out, but it is what it is. Bukestad's a very good utility guy, kind of like Ryan Hartman in Minnesota, can move up and down the lineup depending on where you need him. Utah is a team that strives with or thrives with offense, right? They're an offensive team. They get transition from their defense. Their defense is a little more offensively oriented and can drive to the net. That being said, when they have to play shutdown defense, they're not bad at it. They have a lot of young forwards, and they tend to struggle sometimes with playing that team defense when it's time to shut down the opposing team late in the third. But honestly, this is it's about right for Utah. Connor Ingram, I thought, played fine. Vemelka's played fine. I think their defense has been fine, right? I don't. I don't know if they're gonna play. I think they'll be in the hunt for a wild card position. I don't know if they'll be in or out, and you can make a case for either or. They're an offensively minded team. They have a lot of offensive weapons and firepower. But this is a team that plays with speed and relies on the transition game. So you're relying a lot on your defense to start that transition to your offense. Find those stretch passes, and make those quick decisions to get the puck in deep and give you a chance to rely on your speed. And that's how this team scores a lot of their goals. Not all of them, but and when you're missing two of your defensemen, your starting defensemen, that definitely hurts. Especially a guy like John Marino, who can play physical in front of the net, right? A guy like Dursey, who's extremely good at playing that transition hockey. Those guys both kind of hurt not having in the lineup. So I think that's also a factor. We're going to get injuries. It is what it is. I think I've watched two Utah games this year. They're not a bad team by any means. They're going to win their fair share of games this year. They're a good, strong team. I don't see them winning the division good. I know there's a lot of hype about them at the beginning of the year, once they won their first few games. But yeah, I think we're starting to see Utah kind of for what they are, and that's okay because they're not a bad team and they have an incredibly bright future. Colorado, 4-4, no overtime losses, 8 points in the standings. Colorado is a team that got off to an 0-4 start and have won their last 4 games. If you're just looking at the standings, you could be a little concerned, like, 4-4, that's a point per game. That's an 82-point season. That's 10, 15 points out of a wild card spot. I'm not worried about Colorado. I'm really not. Colorado has a lot of injuries. Some of those guys will get back in the lineup, get healthy, and that'll help. But this is a team that notoriously has struggled with goaltending. Struggle is kind of a harsh word, but hasn't relied on goaltending as much as other teams have to find their success. Right, and kind of get away with not having a superstar in net, which is fine. It's worked out. It won them a Stanley Cup, right? But this is a team that has a lot of good players top to bottom. Their offensive depth, not necessarily the greatest, but at the same time, when you can rely on Ranton and McKinnon to put up 24-plus minutes a night, I think they're both top 5 in time on ice for forwards this year. That's tough to defend, right? You can't just throw out your first pairing for every shift against these guys. You're gonna have to rely on your second and third pairing defensemen to shut down Colorado's top lines, and as a result, that is going to produce goals. Right? You have some guys on defense, like a Cale Makar, for example, that can drive into the zone and score a goal. I'm not too worried about Colorado. There's a little concern about their defense. I think that'll get better once guys get healthy, some of their forwards especially. Colorado, I'm not concerned about. They'll be back. They're going to jump up the standings pretty quick. I'm not concerned about them. Nashville, off to a 1-5 start. They just got their first win against the Boston Bruins. They have 2 points on the year. They're in dead last in the Central. Nashville, there was some concern about Nashville. They came out against Boston. They beat Boston. They beat, it wasn't really a close game. They played well. The defense looked good. UC Saros looked good. He made some tough saves. There was a breakaway that David Pastrnak had, and UC Saros was so good positionally and playing Pastrnak and the puck so well that Pastrnak could not find an opening to shoot, and eventually lost the puck because he got too close to UC Saros, and there you go. Though it didn't technically count as a save, that is effective goaltending. Um, I'm not concerned about the Nashville team. I'm wearing the jersey. I'm not super concerned about them. I think they'll be fine. This is a team that needs to come out and try for a full 60-minute, put a full 60-minute effort in place. They'll be okay. I'm not super concerned about Nashville. They have the talent. They have the skill. They have the goaltending. They have the defense. They have good coaching. Andrew Burnett is a very good coach. They have the right mentalities. They have good systems in place. I think it's just one of those things. You get off to a cold start. You have some of your guys not firing on all cylinders. It wouldn't surprise me to see this team get somewhere around 40, 45, maybe around the 40 win mark this year. It really wouldn't. Right? Nashville, I'm not worried about. Last up, we got Calgary. I've only watched one Calgary game, but they're off to a 5-1-1 start, 11 points in the Pacific Division. Some of their guys have really impressed me. Connor Zary, absolutely fantastic to watch. This is one of those teams where they sold some of their pretty major pieces off and were expected to kind of finish near the bottom. A lot of people did. I like to look at their roster. I didn't think they were that bad where they were going to contend for the first overall pick, or at least be in that lottery. At least the top three worst teams in the league. Even like bottom five, I don't know. This is a team that sold a lot of their strong offensive pieces off. It's a team that is rebuilding per se, right? But you have some guys really stepping up. Jonathan Huberdeau has looked very good lately. They're changing their systems. They're trying to fit their systems to their players, right? You see Jonathan Huberdeau getting up on the rush and scoring. This is, I don't think first place. I don't think they're in first place right now. But let me just double check. Nope, they are. They're first place in the Pacific. I don't think that's sustainable. But at the same time, I think there are beatable teams where you can get points and you can make a case to kind of be in that wild card bubble. I think the wild card in the West is going to be very interesting. You have a lot of teams that could contend for a wild card spot. Some good teams are going to miss the playoffs in the West. It's going to happen. It just is what it is. There's some really bad teams, and there's a lot of really good teams in the Western Conference. Calgary, I'm not super worried about. I do think they're playing better than they are. But they're playing team hockey. They're playing as a unit. They're defending. They have each other's backs. They look good. I don't think they're going to finish first in the Pacific, but they will take a step back. I don't think they're going to be like. I think they'll have a better season than the Ducks. I think they'll have a better season than the Sharks, and they might have a better season than Seattle. I like Seattle, but Calgary, Seattle kind of play a bit of a similar game in terms of both like team defense first and trying to score off the rush. Seattle not as prominent scoring on the rush as they were a couple of years ago. There are differences between the teams and the systems and how they play. But Calgary, Seattle both play games that could win hockey games. That keep games close, and you get a few extra points out of certain games that you otherwise wouldn't have. So that's it. That's where I am with these teams at the moment. Again, it's we're a little under 10% of the way through the season for some of these teams. It's still early. There's a lot of hockey to play. It's literally still October. Season only started just a few weeks ago, so there's a lot of time. And obviously, if you have different opinions, you've watched different teams, like let drop a comment, talk about it. It's all fun. Hockey, it's a fun time of year to really dive into the hockey matchups and teams and stats, and kind of see who gets off to a hot start and who could have a career year if they start off hot and they stay hot, right? So it's fun to watch. But if you're a fan of these teams, you have concern, you don't have concern. Um, Probably my biggest concern is Boston at this point. I think the other teams look good. I think some of these teams will drop off. Some of these teams will bounce back. But these are kind of the notable teams that they don't necessarily look correct in the standings. You're like, wow, is Calgary really first in the Pacific? Yeah. um, but sometimes there's a little more to the story, and this isn't factoring in matchups and who they've played. Minnesota, to be fair, has played some not so great teams. They played Columbus twice already, right? But then they go into Florida and they just won in the Florida Panthers and at Florida Panthers and at Tampa Bay Lightning, which were two big wins for them. And they looked good doing it too. It didn't look like fluky wins or anything. So we'll see. That's all I got. I appreciate you. Take care, right?